With so many people right now switching to vegan and vegetarian diets right now, let us spend a couple of minutes just talking about the science of plant-based protein for muscle gain as well as for reducing muscle loss. At the end of the video, I'll give you the top 5 tips for using plant-based protein if either of those things are your goal. So let's get going. Okay, first things first, I'm not vegan, I'm not even vegetarian, I'm definitely pretty much a meatitarian, but I recently got a question about whether the body only uses 40% of plant-based protein that we take in, and so I figured I'd get at that question by making a short video. So what does the question even mean? Well, if you're watching this, both you and I are interested in the science of lifting and in body composition, and in using smarter approaches to both of those things. Now, the question really is asking whether or not plant-based protein is less than half as effective as animal-based protein for building or for maintaining muscle. And a couple answers. Short answer, yes. The slightly longer answer, yes and no. But the real answer is not necessarily. And to understand why, we really have to stop and break this down. So, how useful any protein is going to depend on a number of factors. So all proteins are made of individual building blocks or units called amino acids. I'm sure you're pretty much familiar with that term. And there are 20 amino acids that occur naturally. You've also probably heard of essential amino acids or EAAs and most likely BCAAs, but essential amino acids, those are 9 of the 20 and they're essential because our bodies cannot manufacture them, and so in order to obtain those, we have to ingest those from our foods. And let's take it a step further. So-called complete proteins are ones that have all 9 of those essential amino acids. And in a general sense, pretty much all plant-based proteins, except for some soy proteins, are incomplete because they don't have all 9. So chalk that one up. And then for any protein to be incorporated into muscle, first you have to eat it, digest it, absorb it, get it to skeletal muscle, and then have that protein trigger skeletal muscle protein synthesis. There are tons of plant-based high protein foods, and you're probably familiar with many of them, from soy based products to peas, beans, lentils, rice, oats, quinoa, nuts, whole grains like wheat, millet, spelt, barley. But by far the most popular protein sources are going to be soy-based. And of course you're familiar with all the meat-based or animal-based protein sources, so meat, fish, dairy, milk, eggs, and so on. Okay, so let's start with digestion and absorption. Generally speaking, the physical structure of many plant-based foods is less accessible for human digestion as compared with animal products. And that's for a number of reasons. I mean, obviously, many plants are very fibrous in nature, and that makes it difficult to get at the nutrients, as well as the physical chemical structure of many plant proteins is such that it's difficult for our digestive enzymes to access. Add to that, many plants contain other natural chemicals that make digestion more challenging. Things like phytic acid, protease inhibitors, hemagglutinins, tannins, and there are a range of others. So that's also an issue. And then the rate at which protein is digested can also come into play. So you're pretty familiar with the idea of whey protein being pretty rapidly digested, and on the opposite end for an animal, milk-based protein, casein, being much more slowly digested. Just think of soy protein as being somewhere in the middle, so keep that in mind. Okay, so once that digestive process has occurred, now the proteins or the amino acids have been absorbed into the bloodstream. What happens next? Well, what happens next is now you need the amino acids to get incorporated into that muscle tissue rather than getting degraded. And generally speaking, this appears to be a less efficient process for the incomplete plant-based proteins, possibly due to the limiting presence of amino acids like leucine. And let's pause for a second, because leucine is a critical amino acid and is the so-called master regulator of protein synthesis. And it's an amino acid that tends to be generally lower in concentration in plant-based versus animal-based foods. So what does the science say? Well, two ways to look at this. The first one is the rate of protein synthesis in muscle. And in studies that examined individuals or enrolled individuals, either young or old, following a bout of resistance training and then administering either animal-based or plant-based protein, the benefit of animal-based was significantly greater than that for plant-based protein post-workout. So basically, consuming a whey-based protein drink after your training truly does provide a greater specific acute muscle synthetic response as compared with something that's soy-based. And they looked at it, or other investigators looked at this sort of over the long term for the actual physical benefit, like do you gain more muscle or do you preserve more muscle mass when you consume animal-based versus plant-based protein? And the answer there again was yes. Even looking out as long as a 9-month study, there was quite a significant difference between the two groups in favor of consuming animal-based protein. Now, even though scientifically gram for gram, animal-based versus plant-based proteins is going to give you a greater benefit in terms of protein synthesis and muscle gain or muscle preservation, don't get too freaked out about plant-based protein, because there's quite a bit of evidence or evidence-based strategies that you can use if you're vegan or vegetarian to make gains or to preserve lean mass at a rate similar to those people who are not vegan or vegetarian. So here are my top 5 tips that you should keep in mind if this sounds like an approach you want to take. Number 1, increase the overall amount of protein that you're consuming if you're following a plant-based diet. So studies have shown that by simply increasing the overall quantities, you can get results similar to consuming whey-based protein. So for example, go with 40 instead of 20 grams of soy, or 60 grams of a wheat-based protein appears similar in effect to 35 grams of whey protein. Secondly, a wider range of plant-based sources, and deliberately attempt to blend these to ensure that you're taking in adequate amounts of the 9 essential amino acids. And a similar approach to blending, quote unquote, a bit artificially, is to then consume amino acid fortified plant-based foods. Thirdly, and many people do this without even thinking about it, but supplementing with essential amino acids or a BCAA supplement can increase the availability overall of these critical amino acids and help to jumpstart and to fuel muscle protein synthesis on a plant-based diet. Now, if you are vegetarian and not strictly vegan, the fourth one is for you, which is to consider blending both plant and animal-based proteins, of course, based on whatever your specific individual approach is and what your needs might be. And finally, number 5 is to use some plant selections which have a more balanced composition of amino acids. So they're both natural and GMO, and I'm not going to get into that, but natural and GMO varieties of crops that have increased quantities of specific amino acids, and you could, just consider those as options in your diet. So, that's basically it. The take-home message here is that in a very strict sense, yes, you might want to consider animal-based proteins more effective at stimulating protein synthesis and overall in building and preserving lean muscle mass. But plant-based sources in number 1, increased quantities, and by using intelligent strategies can get you similar results. So the lesson really is to choose what works best for you and adapt that approach to your goals and your habits, and to not only work hard, obviously, but to work smart and to be more consistent. Alright guys, so I've tried to keep the video relatively short and straightforward, but there are additional details if you're interested. Go ahead, check out my blog on my website. The link will be right in the description below. Of course, if you have questions on the topic or about the video, then feel free to leave those questions down in the comment section or across in the blog, up to you. Of course, if you appreciated this content, then please go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Now, if you're someone who is looking for a smarter, evidence, scientific-based approach to fitness and nutrition, then you might want to consider subscribing to the channel. And if you know others that would be similarly interested, then feel free to share it with them as well. But until the next video, guys, aloha from Kauai.